Hello, I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to today's Kaffeepause. Each week, we check in with a Berlin-based journalist to talk about emerging stories and breaking news. In the summer, things have been a little slower, but that does not mean that there has been a shortage of things to talk about. I'm joined today by award-winning journalist Vladimir Balzer from Deutschlandfunk. Vladimir, herzlich willkommen.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
I am really looking forward to our conversation. And of course, in the last couple of weeks or so, we've been going back and forth via email to try to figure out what the key issues are that we should talk about today. And I think one of the things that we're all too aware of is summer is coming to an end. Germany has seen high temperatures and low water levels. So maybe let's talk about just the mood in Berlin, the mood in Germany. What is occupying people at the moment?
Well, let's say, I don't know, the political atmosphere seems to be, or starts getting agitated, I suppose. I mean, there are so many different things. There's a global crisis. We all know about the climate crisis. We know about the war in Europe, many other things which the German public faces in the moment. And we see vulnerable ecosystems. Just recently, we had a poisoning of the river Oder, which is this river, running at the border between Germany and Poland, still not having found out what actually was the reason for that. But tons of fish are dead and the whole ecosystem is dead. We had a drought, which is a perfect basis for wildfires, and a thing in the States as well, I'm afraid. At the same time, the gas crisis, of course, the massive rise of energy costs and so on. This all comes together, and German government, which consists, as you know, of three parties: the FDP, which are Liberal Democrats, the Green Party, and the Social Democrats, are actually facing what you call a kind of maybe a stronger tension also in German society, because it shows where the cracking points could be. This will probably at the end will be something like, I don't know, social tensions, social upheaval, especially bearing in mind that the support for sanctions against Russia is kind of weakening, because people see to what cost do they come. It's half a year now, this war going on. Sanctions are almost up for half a year. And now it's really a question of, how you actually, what is your relation to these kind of sanctions, and are you ready as a citizen? Are you also ready as society to bear the costs of these sanctions, which you can feel also in the German society?
Then maybe you're a radio journalist, so you're used to hearing people's voices. Maybe in the interest of good internet, audio continues to work. I hope in our conversation that we'll come back to the issues that the governing coalition is facing, the tensions it might have. But before we get to that, there are a couple of other things I'd like to ask you about. One is, you listed a number of issues that are occupying people's attention at the moment, from the political situation to the climate crisis to the war in Ukraine, to the cost of energy, and so on. But you did not mention COVID. How much are people thinking about COVID at this point, or is it really something that people have sort of come to terms with, resign themselves to, and there are bigger issues that they are addressing?
Well, it's summertime everywhere in Europe. It's a hot summer. It's a dry summer. People are outside, and as we know, the COVID crisis is not as heavy during the summertime. People are outside. We have this kind of you don't have this problem that people are in closed rooms and infect other people. So that's why this is not a big issue in the moment, as also infection numbers are pretty low in this very moment. Of course, government, there is a preparation process for for October, November, December, when it's getting colder, people are getting back in closed rooms, but this is not really an issue. Maybe people are tired of it. I mean, this is like probably everywhere in the world, that we are coming into the third year of this pandemic, and people are much more concerned about what I said in the first place, like the energy crisis, the rising prices, the inflation, this war going on in the middle of Europe. So that's why COVID actually is not so much in the focus in the moment.
Maybe I can ask you a question. And
yeah.
Everybody, this is Rob Fenstermacher. I'm the Chief Content Officer. And I'm back on the screen there. I wasn't quite prepared in my suit jacket or anything for today, but we'll see how things go at this point. So I think another topic that we wanted to talk about was the issues that have been surrounding Olaf Scholz recently. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that. It sounded like it was an issue for a little bit, but now it's subsiding. So maybe you could just, so what's the mood at the moment about the leadership of the coalition government and the SPD?
Yeah. Well, there are a couple of issues which Olaf Scholz is facing, obviously. I don't know if you're referring probably to the so-called Cum-Ex scandal, to this tax evasion scandal, which dates back, I don't know if you're aware of this, it dates back to his time when he was governing mayor of Hamburg. Mm-hmm. And it's still not really resolved. There is a committee actually checking on that, and he has been there last Friday being questioned again, and he appeared in front of that committee. What came out of it? What is the implication for Scholz? Not very much actually came out of it, because Olaf Scholz is a person who is not very... there again, Steve is back.
We're talking about Olaf Scholz and Cum-Ex, Steve.
Yeah. He's not, like, speaking of Olaf Scholz, he's not a very, let's say, communicative guy. He's not a person who likes to open up to the public, nor to a committee, nor to his critics. Sometimes he's kind of oversensitive, I suppose, when he reacts to critics and so on. So he still has to find his kind of, I don't know, how can you say, his kind of public style, how he actually behaves, how he moves in the public.
But do you think he can change that at this point? I mean, it's
I'm not so sure.
Been his style forever, and it's been his
tension
style.
Tension is getting stronger. Tension is getting stronger, and there is a political autumn actually coming, which could be really tough on him, which could be tough also on the coalition. There are tensions inside the coalition. We have this coalition system in Germany, which should be based on a consensus. And we have three parties here, which are pretty different also, from their whole kind of political culture, from their history. And there's especially tensions between the Greens and the Liberal Democrats, so Liberal Democrats and the Greens. And speaking of Olaf Scholz, he should be the one as a chancellor to bind this all together, to lead this government. And it doesn't look like it in the moment. There are much more popular ministers. That's the Minister of Commerce from the Greens, Robert Habeck. There's the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Annalena Baerbock, who has been a couple of times to the States. Obviously, Habeck has been also to the States. And they are much more communicative, like to talk to people, like to explain the crisis, like to explain their politics. And Olaf Scholz is a totally different person. And this Cum-Ex scandal, this tax evasion issue, which he's facing, he actually does what he does very often, to say, I don't know anything about it. I don't have any information. That's what he did last time, the second time he appeared in front of that committee. And so public don't really know what to actually think about that political figure in the moment.
And are people talking about it? I mean, you did talk a little bit about the move, but how much is this really actually being discussed amongst the public?
You mean this tax evasion?
Scandal. Yeah.
Yeah, not so much, actually, because this is way back. This has been a couple of years ago, even before COVID hit. There's just, I don't know, there are greater crises probably, which people are aware of and which people face, and this is it's a kind of regional topic. It's a traditional Hamburg private bank. Right. It's been at the time when he hasn't been chancellor yet. So that's why, no, I don't have to, we journalists, of course, are interested in it, because it could be at the end of the day, there could something come out of it, which may be a problem for his political career, but this is still not the case. It's not as hot as his opponents would like to have it.
Got it. So it looks like Steve is back, so I'll hand things back.
Yeah.
No, that's terrific. You actually were talking about something that I had hoped that we would have time to talk about as well, namely the Cum-Ex scandal and the fact that Olaf Scholz had to testify before a committee in Hamburg on Friday, and that there has been quite a bit of controversy around this. It sounds, Vladimir, as if you think the political implications for Scholz might not be that great, or at least that it's too early to tell, but that there is some frustration because it's hard to determine what Scholz knew when, and he's saying that he does not remember what was discussed in some of these conversations.
Yeah, and this is the way he communicates. This is a kind of typical situation. You can really see how he communicates. There were other occasions when you saw that he sometimes is almost like difficult to explain. It's almost like overwhelmed by some social pressure, or by some, let's say, tough situations, like the other day when the Palestinian president has been to the chancellery, Mahmoud Abbas, and there was this one comment of him, this totally unacceptable comment of him, when he accused the Israelis of doing 50 different Holocausts to the Palestinians. And this was said in something like, it was almost at the end of a press conference. But it has been said, it has been heard, and Scholz also heard it. And it looked like, at the very first moment, it looked like as he had overheard it. But he hadn't. He wasn't just spontaneous enough. He wasn't like, let's say, what his communication skills are concerned, wasn't strong enough to really face that situation and to really say, no, this is unacceptable if you say something like this, especially in a German chancellery. This is just unacceptable. And this has been another situation where you can really feel, I don't know, as if he's somebody who just doesn't like to communicate to the public, which is not a good thing for the German chancellor, especially in this crisis situation, the strongest economy in Europe. And I think Europe expects more from a leader in those times than maybe, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. It's just a different situation. We have a war, we have a climate crisis, we have rising prices, we have social tensions. People, this is my impression at least, people are expecting more than just, seeing a rather, let's say, bureaucratic type, stony-faced and distant.
I mean, given these difficulties that Scholz seems to be facing at the moment, in terms of the public outrage over his non-response to Abbas, over the testimony he had to give on Friday, and the likelihood that he will be invited back for a third round of statements with regard to COMEX, it's actually a good time for him to be out of the country. And Olaf Scholz is in Canada at the moment, or arriving in Canada at the moment, together with his vice chancellor and economics minister, Robert Habeck. They seem to be talking up the importance of the relationship between Germany and Canada. But at the center of this trip is energy. And so I'd like to come back to energy a little bit in our conversation, because it was interesting to read that the Bundesbank is now talking about a recession. They're expecting inflation of about 10% this year, expected to go down a little bit next year. And a large reason for this recession and inflation is the cost of energy. Of course, issues around supply chains, other tensions as well. But there seems to be real concern, and you outlined this in the beginning as well, about the cost of energy, heating, gas, but also rising food costs. In the past few days, there's been some discussion by the government to offer some targeted relief packages. Are those relief packages going to do enough? What I've been hearing is that it's not just lower income people who are going to be heavily affected, but really the middle class that will be heavily affected by inflation and a recession. What's your sense of what the government can do to help people?
Well, there are a couple of things which probably could help, and there are some, or there have been, it's actually now almost over at the end of August, there have been some very popular also measures actually to meet these kind of challenges. You were talking about reliefs, like tax reliefs. There were some, but rather small tax reliefs. And there's also a dispute going on between the FDP, the Liberals, and the Greens, and the Social Democrats. Liberals traditionally stand for tax cuts. Well, this is almost everywhere in Europe, also in different places. Their understanding is that the less taxes people pay, the better. And this is what is going on now, that you have this tension, inside this coalition, this yellow, green, red coalition. That the FDP tries to focus much more on tax cuts. Social Democrats and Greens mainly believe in subsidies and kind of direct payments and lowering actually costs of some everyday issues like mobility. And then this is where I'm coming back to this very popular measure of the so-called €9 ticket. I don't know if you heard of this in the States. This has been valid for the last 3 months, actually. So you had for €9, you could travel in all regional trains, in trams, and buses, in the S-Bahn in Berlin, anywhere in Germany, just for €9 per month, which was used really, and this was widely popular, was used by millions. So you had packed trains, especially at the weekends. You had very many people just using it. So the Greens try to actually sell this kind of political measure also for themselves, saying, look, I mean, public transport is something which could be really, really popular, Mm-hmm. So they're definitely using the situation also to promote their own political goals of, strengthening public transport, moving a little bit back from this individual car culture, what you have in Germany, which the FDP stands for. Mm-hmm. So there were some things which, out of this crisis, actually almost injected some positivity into German society. This was this €9 ticket. All the other things, all these subsidies, little tax cuts here and there, are so desperate. I mean, there are so 10, 12 different measures. They're just too small. Every single of them is just too small to really recognize a political idea behind it. It's too mixed up.
It's interesting. Obviously there's some support that government can provide, but there are also things that individuals can do. I was listening to your station earlier today, and there was an extensive piece on things that energy consumers can do to reduce their energy costs, whether it's how they cook, and being able to save €20 a year in electricity by putting the lid on their pots and pans when they're cooking, to devices that can be installed to make shower heads more efficient. And so related to this, one of our viewers has a question that she just submitted in writing. With regard to the rising cost of energy, is Germany working toward the voluntary 15% reduction in energy consumption that Europe broadly agreed to? She goes on to ask whether households are being asked to reduce energy consumption, or whether industry is more likely to curb production because of energy constraints.
Yeah, well, industry is not really. I mean, it's definitely affected by the rising of the energy prices, but I actually mainly see, in the moment at least, that rather private households are asked to reduce energy consumption. And it's more like this. I mean, this is kind of typical for German political culture, that you go rather small steps. It's just rather small parts. It's a kind of mosaic of different little things. There's no general, there's no general reform or something. There's no huge movement. There is no big thing going on. It's rather, as I said, there's dozens of different little measures, and especially private households are. We are speaking of really a lot of money, which could be a problem for especially like families and people with lower income. We're speaking of 200, 300, maybe 400 euros more per year, some even 1,000 euros more per year for bigger families. So that's a huge problem. Government is trying to help, but can't really, can't help everybody, and can't really substitute these kind of situations. So that's why it's not as hot the subject as it will be probably in a couple of weeks. As I said, I mean, it's always a question of in what situation you are in the moment. It's summer, it's late summer, it's a totally different thing. We're not talking of heating. We are not talking of long nights and so on. So in the moment, it's not as hot, but Germany is, how can I say, bracing for it.
Related to that, I mean, one of the issues that many people in the US have been following is the question of the future of Germany's 3 nuclear power plants. And there's been some discussion, even over the weekend. Olaf Scholz indicated that Germany could extend the life of these 3 plants beyond the end of the year. It seems as if Vice Chancellor Robert Habeck has indicated both that the phase out could be delayed in the event of a power crisis, a electricity crisis, but he's also been somewhat skeptical as to how much this would actually benefit the German electricity market. Can you talk a little bit about when the results of the next stress test are expected, and what the public sentiment is about keeping these 3 reactors online?
It's really interesting to see that, because I mean, the majority of the German public was actually ready, especially after Fukushima in Japan, really to end this period of nuclear energy. And this was actually, this was one of the key points also for the green movement, dating back to the early 80s. This is part of the green identity, and has been also part. Actually, it's also written in the coalition contract also, that definitely until the end of this year, the last 3 power plants will be shut off. Greens are not so happy about that discussion, which you can hear every time Robert Habeck, the Minister of Commerce, the Vice Chancellor, and a leading green figure, always mentions that there is only a little part. I mean, we're speaking of 3 power plants, which could reduce. I mean, if you leave them on, he's at least saying it could reduce gas usage by 2 or 3%. So it wouldn't really help very much in the moment to lower the dependency on Russian gas. And the other thing is, which I'm actually sure, which could be also a big problem, that obviously nuclear plants are a safety issue. So they have to be checked every couple of years. And this kind of safety checking procedure takes, I didn't know that before, actually. It takes a very long time, at least a year, sometimes even 2 years, before they could actually go back on in case Germany decides to stick with nuclear energy. So if that happens, the stress test, which will be done the earliest in 2 weeks, the latest in the mid-September. So the latest mid-September, we know about these 3 nuclear plants. But even if they will stay, if they would not be shut off at the end of the year, we're speaking of maybe half a year, maybe 1 year, but not more than that. Because it's, as I said, it's written in the coalition contract that Germany is leaving this nuclear energy. This would be, if this would change, this would be a huge political step, and I'm not so sure if this coalition is ready for this, because this could really, as I said, Greens are pretty strong in the moment. They could be even be the most popular part of this coalition, and they still stick with leaving the nuclear energy. This is still that's a really a crucial part of their political DNA. They would never drop that.
Certainly, Robert Habeck and Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock seem to be much more popular than Olaf Scholz at the moment when you think about polls. But one of the things that I've been hearing and reading a little bit about is that younger Greens seem to be more concerned about the continued use of coal than they are about the use of nuclear power. And so even within the Green Party, there seems to be some of a generational shift in terms of thinking about nuclear.
Yeah, this could well be, because they rely on pretty good safety measures, which are with the safety measures on German nuclear plants, which is definitely true. And the coal, I mean, obviously, using coal is one of the main reasons for the climate crisis. So this is much more an obvious climate problem, climate issue. So that's why, yes, not only Greens, not only younger Greens, especially, and not only them, it's actually, I have the impression the majority of the German public, which also polls say, shifted during this war times, seeing that we need to end this dependency on Russian energy, and is ready to actually at least pause this exit out of nuclear energy. There has something changed. And maybe they are also afraid of, maybe they have the idea of nuclear energy being not as costly as other energy sources.
Yeah, I'd like to maybe ask a bit of a personal question. You are originally from Eastern Germany, from the former GDR. And you experienced the German unification process, and of course have followed German unity since then, and have your finger on the pulse of dissenting views in East and West. And I'd be curious to know, given your East German background, how these issues that we're talking about might be perceived differently in the East and the West, both when it comes to the big sort of energy questions, but also views of Russia, views of the war in Ukraine, views of the government. You talked a little bit earlier about there being sort of a sort of weakening of resolve when it comes to sanctions. Is that something that one's seeing more in the East than in the West?
Yeah, well, it's obviously a complex issue, but generally speaking, this has been always the case for the East German side of the public in Germany. East Germans tend to, how can I say, to express their political perspectives pretty much clearer, much less regarding, I'd say, a certain political correctness than maybe in the West. Many don't feel the need for a kind of consensus, don't have this much of a trust into institutions, into parties, even in the democratic system as in the West, because, of all these disruptions in the 90s and in the 2000s, there's so much been going on after the fall of the wall. It's been a great thing that the wall came down, but afterwards we all know there have been a very deep economical and social crisis. And this is also given to the next generation, even to the younger people, because they see how the parents really had a hard time, adapting to the new political system. This being said, they don't trust as much, let's say, as I said, these institutions, the political system, and are I don't know, they are ready also to be more radical. They have their own, and this is another issue because you spoke of Soviet Union, Russia, Ukraine, and so on. It's been a very complex relationship to Russia until today, because, of course, historically speaking, it's been the occupying country. It's been the liberator in 1945. Then it's been the occupying country. Russian language, for example, was taught in schools. Every East German who grew up in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s had to learn the Russian language. So there has been, even without wanting it from the political side, there has been a kind of cultural interest in Russia and in the Russian language and the Russian culture and so on. And maybe out of this comes a certain, more emotional, more positive relationship to Russian culture, to Russian history, just closer, just a little bit culturally closer. That's why many don't have as much of a problem saying, enough of these sanctions. We see they don't work as much as we wanted to, which in parts, at least if you look at it superficially, may be true. If you see Russian economics is at least on the surface doing more or less fine, at least not as bad as the West probably thought. And East Germans have another social situation. There are many more poor families, many more people struggling with their economical situation. They see the prices going up. They see the consequences of these sanctions and are very much afraid of what comes, in the next couple of months. That's why they maybe remember, their cultural relationship to Russia. They remember, how there was more than just facing a kind of enemy state. And this all comes together to the conclusion of many East Germans saying, why should we suffer? Why should we suffer in East Germany? We see that these sanctions don't work. That's what they think. And this is this whole solidarity thing, which is for me very sad to see. Solidarity with the Ukrainian people, with the Ukrainian fight for freedom, with Ukraine is really weakening. Because many, especially older people in East Germany, still have this idea of a kind of abstract Soviet Union in their minds, and they still are. They still have a problem actually accepting the real independence of Ukraine, and especially, and at the same time saying, like, cynically speaking, why do we East Germans have to finance, the political crisis in the former Soviet Union? So this all comes together.
Well, Vladimir, at some point, I'd like to maybe have you come back and we can have a conversation just about the Mauer im Kopf and the East-West divide and some of these social, cultural, and political differences between East and West. But as we slowly come to an end here, I'd like to bring in one more topic, a topic which indeed we could also handle separately. But since you cover cultural issues and cultural affairs for Deutschlandradio, I'd like to ask you about this year's Documenta. Every 5 years in Kassel, there's a major art event, and this event, even in good times, is no stranger to controversy, but it seems as if this year was even more controversial. An artwork was pulled from display because of anti-Semitic caricatures that were included. The event's general director resigned. Can you paint the picture for us a little bit of what happened at this year's Documenta and what it sort of means for the art world?
Well, Documenta is, as many of you probably know, is regarded to be the most influential art exhibition in the world. It's taking place every 5 years, so pretty rarely. And it's been established in the 50s in Kassel, which is a middle-sized town of, not so sure, I think 150,000 people or something, in the middle of Germany. And it's always meant to be actually culturally, I mean, it was one of the symbols of like this new culture of Germany after the war, of opening up to the world, opening them up to the art world, to controversies, to new developments, and so on. So this has been always Western Germany was always proud of this Documenta. It's been always a very, very important place culturally and so on. But this year's Documenta is a little bit different compared to all the others in the last decades, because this time there is not just one curator, there is actually a whole group of curators. So they gave the board of the Documenta gave the curatorship to an art collective from Indonesia, who emphasizes on, let's say, open cooperation, on social issues. They're a pretty left group with also, let's say, outspoken anti-capitalistic kind of approach. And if the board of the Documenta leaves they choose the curator, and the curator is totally free. What to do, what to show, what artists to invite. And this time, as I said, it's a collective of 10 to 12 people. Ruan Grupa is the name, from Indonesia, and they have a totally different approach actually to curatorship. It's not this autocratic kind of controlled thing. It's a more curatorship on eye level with artists. They wouldn't even call them artists, they are collaborators. Only little control, little checking, no interference, very strong autonomy of these artists who are invited. So this being said, they also invited people they knew from their world. We're speaking of the global South, Indonesia, which has not so much been part of the Western art market and Western art scene. And they invited invited a group, Taring Padi, who showed some motives on their huge kind of banners everywhere in Kassel, which definitely are anti-Semitic. There was this one Orthodox Jew with an SS insignia on his head. Then there was a Mossad agent, which was shown as a pig, and many other actually examples where you could see, well, this is obviously anti-Semitic, but it's been just one part of their work. There has been also other works, and they see, I don't know, Israel as a symbol of international capitalism. I mean, all these things we heard of when we speak of anti-Semitism. And this was taken off, this banner, but the thing is, that it's been in Germany, you call this salami tactic. So you only solve little slices of the problem. You know, you're not facing the whole problem, not trying. And the thing is, like, almost every 3 or 4 days, something new came up, something other kind of anti-Semitic motive here and there, and so on. So some taboos, which should be also taboos. You know, art is free for sure. But I think it's just not acceptable if a group, especially Jews, are treated like that. And discussions were going on, but you really saw that even, you know, all these discussions, public discussions, which were taking place in Kassel and elsewhere, that you have a kind of misunderstanding of also aesthetic codes, and they didn't recognize that as anti-Semitic, what we see as anti-Semitic. They said, like, whatever, Israel is just an example. There are many other countries, you know, which they want to criticize, and this is just one example, which in parts is true. They also showed other secret agents from other countries, soldiers from other countries with, you know, this kind of insignias and as pigs and as other animals. So it's a kind of conglomerate of very strong symbols and signals and codes, and you really saw that it wasn't enough curatorship. It just wasn't enough curatorship. You need a stronger curatorship, you know. You need to say, okay, you can do whatever you want, but there are some taboos, there are some points and some lines which you can't cross, at least not in Germany. When we're speaking of Germany, you know, because it was Holocaust stuff. Yeah.
Vladimir, I mean, the media, you know, was in uproar about this for several weeks, certainly in Germany, because of the images, and there was a lot of concern about that and about the anti-Semitism that was expressed. But has this also led to a broader debate about freedom of speech and freedom of expression?
Not really, because there is, let's say, I'm actually pretty happy about this discussion, that this discussion took place, because it kind of sharpened the approach to anti-Semitic images. Yes, you have also, from time to time they pop up in different places, even in kind of serious, well-regarded newspapers. You have caricatures which sometimes even play, you know, with anti-Semitic images, and you also have an uproar. You also have discussions and criticism about that. Well, we all know anti-Semitism is a thing which you probably can't really get rid of in this world, and it also enters, you know, middle class, well-educated kind of groups of people. And I thought it was a good discussion. I thought it was good, and it wasn't a question of freedom of speech or so, because, I don't know, I have the impression that there is so much you can say in Germany in public. And actually, I'm almost sure that there are I don't know, not as many taboos as many would think. I mean, next time probably we could talk about, I don't know, about so-called political correctness, about cancel culture. That's another thing. Anti-Semitism is just a thing which is so. It's just another category. It's just another thing and another level, and it's just completely unacceptable. So I think this whole idea of, you know, having a kind of in this documenta, having a kind of very let's say autonomous curatorship is good, but at the same time you have to, as a board, especially as the board who controls this documenta, you know, you have to be more aware of things which probably could go wrong, and you still have to be, you have to show responsibility, you know. It's not, you know, a kind of totally open mic, open stage art exhibition. It's still the biggest and the most important art exhibition in the world. So you have to be aware of this as a board, as this institution which controls the whole thing, and, you know, which also calls these curators to take care of this exhibition.
I mean, it comes with a certain sense of responsibility, I think it's fair to say.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, Vladimir, thank you so much for this very wide-ranging and interesting conversation. I'm sorry once again about the technical difficulties at my end, but a big thanks to Rob for jumping in as well. But really a huge thanks to you, Vladimir.
My pleasure.
Been very informative, and we look forward to having you back again.
With pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Take care.
Bye-bye.